But in 2007, an iPhone didn't even have the ability to do copy and paste. The innovation itself is not necessarily the whole inflection point. And it wasn't that the cell phone was the invention, because that happened in the 80s by Motorola. It was the idea that certain technologies and innovations got bundled together, which is how are you trying to integrate or utilize AI in business today?
Here's Apple, at the time, the most valuable company in the world, with a lot of very talented engineers. They know how to make good products. And one of the things that I often talk to people about is that
Jeremy Horne is the founder and CEO of Storypedia and the creator of Winnie Chat, an app designed to strengthen human connections across families, teams, and communities. His passion for storytelling began in childhood when he recorded his grandparents' memories on camera, an experience that shaped his mission to preserve wisdom, fight isolation, and foster deeper bonds through innovative technology and meaningful conversations.
You said that the AI can understand previous conversations or memories, but like structurally, what are you doing there?
well, it's one of the few things that's never going to be replaced by AI, because in order to have human connection, you need to have humans. So one of the examples I use is if you're a Facebook user, you can go onto Facebook and you can tell it your favorite, whatever, football teams, music, where you've lived, all of these sorts of things. So we're essentially building up a profile database along those same lines. And importantly,
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AI for Business Owners podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Torello, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Horne as my guest. Jeremy, introduce yourself to the audience, please.
all right, Jeff, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really enjoyed our pre-chat here before we jumped in, and I'm looking forward to the main event here as well. So yeah, as you say, Jeremy Horne is my name. I have been in the agency space for a big part of my career. So I've been working with global brands and bouncing around the world, for the most part, implementing, designing client projects of all sorts of different scopes. But I've always had this interest, which goes back to when I was a kid, and my dad came home with a great big VHS video camera. And I just fell in love with this thing. I mean, to me, it was like time travel, the idea that you could record video footage and then play it back. And it just happened to coincide with my grandparents from Manchester. So we were living in Perth, Australia, which is a very secluded city, especially back in the 80s. And my grandparents had come over from Manchester, and I had this camera, and I did a lot of very average video. But the one thing that I did that has value through to this day is I pointed at my grandparents and I asked them some questions like, what was it like in the olden days? What was my mum like when she was a little girl? And different things like this, that over the years, especially once they'd passed away, the value of this digital asset just continued to grow and grow and grow. And it's really interesting. It's like a photo album. It's not something that you pull out that often, but knowing that it's there just provides just great comfort. And anyway, so I kind of grew from that experience, became a little more professional in the way that I started doing these life story interviews. And I've been doing it ever since, as largely as a hobby, which has now evolved into Storypedia. And we can talk a bit more about that and what we're doing in the space of AI. But that's kind of my journey to where I am today.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we should definitely get into that. Just a quick question. You said you've been working with brands and stuff. Is that in the past, is that marketing related? Or are you doing what do you mean when you say you're working with them?
Yeah, so my role was a client partner and a digital strategist. So my job was to figure out how can we use technology to achieve whatever it is that the client's looking to do. Or in the case of, so a good example is Ford. We were working with Ford Motor Company. It's actually what led me to an opportunity to work over eventually in New York. But at the time I was in London, and I was flying backwards and forwards over to Detroit and over to Dearborn, of all places. And
Yeah.
so I got to know Dearborn pretty well. And it was a really good experience. But eventually I said to the company I was with, it seems to make a lot more sense if I'm a little closer to the action over there. And eventually ended up in New York. But we were working on a platform that was being rolled out based around the Adobe content management system or the experience management system. So Ford had essentially bought that software from Adobe, and our company was implementing it for Ford globally. And my role was to figure out, well, how do we do that? And how do we assemble the team? And how do we manage the team to actually implement that new solution? Working obviously very closely with Adobe and working with Ford's own internal IT people and marketing people as well. So that's probably the best example of what my career has been. I guess you could say the bit in the past that I've been paid for, and then now I've got a startup, Storypedia, and the goal is to essentially grow that and make that the bulk of my time and energy.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that startup. At a high level, it sounds like what you're doing is essentially what you ended up doing with your grandparents a long time ago, trying to record and retain useful information, memories, or whatever you want to say there. You can talk about it more than I can, obviously. But I want to know: are you doing that for individuals? Are you trying to do that from a corporate perspective? Like, what's the scope of what you're doing there?
Yeah, so Storypedia is the name of our company, and I often refer to Storypedia as the Wikipedia of human stories. So essentially, what we're building is a platform that connects people to each other, but essentially connects us with anything through shared story. So on Storypedia, we're going to be tackling, yes, we'll have B2B. I mean, that's kind of some low-hanging fruit, especially now we're in this world where you've got a lot of companies who have remote teams, and you don't get these serendipitous moments where team members get to catch up at the water cooler and have these
Right.
chats and all of those things. It turns out, I think we all know it's really important, but now we also have science that backs up the importance of having these moments and this what essentially is human connection. So Storypedia as a platform is looking at how we can address all of these different use cases around really what is human connection. But we've launched an app called Winnie, and Winnie, interestingly, is actually named after, I mentioned my grandparents, my nana and granddad before. My nana, her name was Winifred. Everyone called her Winnie. And she was an incredible storyteller. And being one of the very first people between her and my granddad that I actually interviewed, I thought it was a really nice nod to them, really. So there's a story behind why it's called Winnie. And so, yeah, we've launched Winnie.chat. It's built on Storypedia. It's what I call our first experience that we're doing. And the focus really is family and friends. And the goal is to build stronger, more meaningful connections amongst your family and friends. We all want to have stronger relationships with our family and friends, but we don't necessarily invest the time, the energy to do those things. And a lot of the technology that we have access to, we don't necessarily use it in a way that does build up what is now, there's a wonderful term for it. It's called social health. And I've really latched onto that. And recently, WHO just announced that they're also latching onto the term as well. So essentially, you've got your physical health, you've got your mental health. And in the past, social health was kind of bundled up with mental health. But now it's this third pillar of health. So you've got your physical, your mental, and you've got social health, which essentially is just the strength of your relationships. But the importance of having strong relationships has been shown to be an integral part of our total health. So I feel I might have got a little sidetracked there with the answer, but
No.
did that kind of cover things?
Yeah, it did for me, and actually, I very much relate to this. I had an extremely strong relationship with my mother's father, and really close for a long time. Fantastic guy, taught me a lot of stuff, and used to tell me amazing stories about his worked in World War II and then worked at Sikorsky helicopter factory in where we lived for 44 years. And just all kinds of amazing, cool stories of him teaching himself how to read blueprints and these things. And as you're talking, I'm saying, boy, I really wish I had all those stories and could talk to Gramp again. And things I remember myself, but maybe I don't remember them correctly. Would have been nice to have that capability. So it it rings true for me.
The nice thing is you can also talk about those stories. So I mean, you recalling those stories is also just an important part of that family history and the legacy. And one of the things that I often talk to people about is that we have this incredible, I say we sort of rolling us into a similar sort of generation, but we have access to a generation, as in our grandparents, and some of us possibly even their great grandparents, if they stuck around for long enough, and the transition of everything that happened in that space of time. I mean, like my grandparents, when they were kids, they didn't even have access to electricity. I mean, it's just hard to wrap my head around that as kids, there's no electricity. Then so that they were being born around the time of the First World War, and both of them were in poor parts of Manchester where electricity was just being rolled out. The street lights were still running off gas. They told me stories of the gas man would come around with this great big rod and light up the gas lamps. And so to have first-hand stories that were told to me that I can now recall and share those with my son, it's, to me at least, it's such an important part of not just family legacy, but just human legacy. And when I look at the stories that I would tell, I mean, I was born at a time when technology, personal computers, and so on were just starting to get out there, and all of a sudden now I can sit there and have a conversation, literally have a conversation with an AI that feels very human in the way that we're able to converse. So it's going to be a different experience for my son when he talks to my parents and me and family that continues on down our family line. So I just think it's so important that we continue sharing those stories so that our future families have a connection back to as far back as can go and beyond just a family tree. To me, it is the stories that just make it so much more interesting.
Yep, I totally agree. Now, let's pivot a little bit. Let's throw AI in this mix. What I want to know initially here is what's your sort of experience, exposure, or your AI journey for you? And then get to the next phase of that, which is how are you trying to integrate or utilize AI in business today? But let's get some background about your exposure, experience, et cetera.
Yeah, so like a lot of people, I think my first exposure was an early version of ChatGPT, and we're going back, I guess, a couple of years now. So I had a few friends who said, "Look, you need to have a look at this," and my initial response was like, "Yeah, like yes, it's probably just another cool thing. I'll get around to it." And then one of my friends said, "No, you really need to have a look at this." So I was like, "All right, cool." I jumped onto the site, signed up, and was immediately blown away. I mean, like for me it was the first demonstration of the Alan Turing test, where the idea that you can talk to a computer and essentially not know the difference whether it's human or computer. And yes, that version you could obviously dig in and reasonably quickly figure out that you're not dealing with a human, but it was almost like the future had just suddenly landed in our laps, and the rate of improvement has just been astounding, to be honest. So my exposure to AI was that. Since then, alongside Storypedia, I do actually do consulting with a company called Rain Ventures, which is all about AI, and we work with clients, helping them become affluent with using AI, helping them coach their teams on how to use AI, and potentially using AI then to build software and products for them. So in essence, it's like an incubator. And Rain Ventures also helps now with what we're doing around Storypedia. So it's all kind of tied together. And then the other part of this is using AI in terms of what we're doing for Storypedia. And again, my goal for this is how do we use AI in a way that it can essentially deliver on our goals, which is to connect people in more meaningful ways. So what we're not doing experiences. I mean, there's some incredible experiences where you can generate an avatar and you can chat with your avatar and you can build up some form of relationship with an avatar, and character AI is a great example of that. Amazing technology, and it certainly has its place, but we at Storypedia are very much focused on human to human connection. And the reason why I think it's one of the few things that's never going to be replaced by AI, because in order to have human connection, you need to have humans connecting with other humans. And the question that we're really looking to answer, and the different use cases that we're bringing to life with AI, and it's not just AI. I mean, some of it is we have some physical conversation cards, and those physical conversation cards have a QR code, and you can scan those, and that then leads you into recording stories and things like that as well. So it's a case of what is the right technology to deliver on the use case. But we're using AI prompts, for instance. So let's say I'm having a chat with my dad. It knows my age. It knows that it's my dad. It knows previous conversations that we've had. So it's going to suggest things to me to ask my dad during that conversation, and vice versa for my dad. It's going to suggest things to him. And one of the places where this really plays out nicely is when my dad is talking with my son, who's 7. And because I'm now in the UK and my dad's in Bondi, Australia, so we don't get to physically see each other all that often. So
Right.
there's a lot of FaceTime calls and things like that. What's nice about being able to use Winnie is it suggests a prompt to my dad that says, "Hey, why don't you ask Theo about this?" Whatever that might be, but something that is relevant and likely to elicit a response from Theo, because quite often, especially once you start having that generational gap, they don't know what to ask each other. I
Right.
mean, literally, they'll give him a call. I'm like, "Hey, chat with your granddad," and he doesn't really know
Right.
what do I talk to granddad about. Granddad's old, and granddad's doing his best to connect with my son, but there is just a generational age gap, and one of the ways we use AI is to just help facilitate that conversation, and then get out of the way and allow that conversation to happen, and that's really the goal of what we're doing.
Okay. I like it. I actually like that your focus is use the AI as a assistive device as opposed to a replacement restructuring kind of thing, which is cool from my point of view. You said that the AI can understand previous conversations or memories or whatever. I don't want you to give away proprietary stuff. That's not what I'm asking for. But like structurally, what are you doing there? Is the AI getting access to transcripts of like what's again, not without I don't want IP. I just want structure, ideas.
No, absolutely. And from a technical perspective, I don't think we're necessarily doing anything in that sense yet. So we've got a roadmap, which gets quite interesting in terms of how we're going to use this, and we can talk a bit about that. But for now, yes, it is predominantly transcripts, and then allowing you, similar to how OpenAI does it, essentially to lay out your memories. So different memories, as it gets to know more about you, it starts putting together a profile of you. You can go in there at any point in time and update that. So one of the examples I use is if you're a Facebook user, you can go into Facebook and you can tell it your favorite, whatever, football teams, music, where you've lived, all of these sorts of things. So we're essentially building up a profile database along those same lines. And importantly, we're then tagging it to say, well, Theo is my son. And if he's my son and this is my dad, then that makes him my dad's grandson. So we're sort of putting together this family tree just based on the different relationships that we have within our family. And a lot of it then happens within this kind of family bubble. So yes, you have the choice if you want to record a story and have it go public, that's fine. But a lot of the time, it's just saving these stories into your family bubble. So then my sister and my extended family and my wife's family will then see those stories as they're recorded. And I might have jumped something there. So essentially, during a conversation, you've got the option to record those stories that come out of it. So for instance, if my grandson says to my dad, "Hey, how did you meet Nana?" Then the option is to record that story that comes out of it. So we now have a story, which is my dad talking about how he actually met my mum. And then everyone can get access to that.
So what I'm extrapolating from a piece of this is that obviously this is a platform where people need to go to have these interactions and communications. And again, the AI has access to some of that stuff. Have you noticed or seen people that weren't in the conversation getting value from the recorded conversations and then contributing, and maybe even so your sister watches a conversation with your dad and your son and then has another conversation with your son that expands on that and said, hang on, he left out a part. Is that happening yet? Is that web being weaved?
Yeah, it needs to happen. I love that you jumped onto that, because that is the intention is, and that's one experience is, within a family and then someone else just adding to the story. The best use case for that is within a group situation. So I've got my group of friends that I went to school with, and some of us stay in touch. So you've got a group now, and the prompts now relate to that group. So within that group, it's going to be saying things like, "Hey, who was your favorite teacher? What was a funny moment that happened with Jeremy?" and so on. So ideally, what we want is to allow several people then to tell stories about a story. So I might recall something
Right.
about the time that so and so, whatever, did something funny with someone else, and then someone else jumps into that and starts recalling that same story. So that's certainly the goal. We haven't actually allowed you to tell stories about stories yet.
Okay.
It's just not a function that's in there yet.
Just because of the way my brain works. The AI could actually help you with this. And what I mean by that is the AI can make a transcript out of the recording, the story, and then look at that transcript and see what names were referenced. When your dad was telling a story and referenced your sister, the AI can then prompt your sister with, hey, by the way, this is what dad said. Do you want to add something to it? AI could then prompt the sister and say, hey, add your, right? Maybe dad doesn't remember it the same way as you. Let's put it all together. And then that story can now have branches.
Yeah, no, and branches to me is where it gets really interesting. And because so initially and look, what is really interesting is that we started the journey of building Winnie over a year ago. And so it's been this kind of slow moving project in parallel with everything else that's kind of going on in life, which includes moving countries and everything else that just happens in the day to day, essentially. But AI was just becoming an option, and we were like, what do we use that we feel comfortable about? The other thing that was really interesting was, so I'm working with a really good development team, super experienced. They've done all sorts of different projects. But what was really interesting was that there was a bit of resistance to building with AI. And this, again, we're probably going back 18 months when we initially started looking at those conversations and trying to figure out what the best way to tackle this was. But yeah, I remember, as a product guy, I was getting very excited. I'm like, look, this is incredible. It's AI. It's going to accelerate. We can do this. We can do this. But to try and get the devs to have that same sense of confidence about using those tools. Now, I think it has changed quite a bit in that space of time. But what it meant for us was that we've ended up with a lot of tools within the app that are traditionally programmed, and then we've used AI just for those slivers of experience. At the moment, at least you get this MVP out the door. And now the roadmap going forwards, I would say, is probably 70, 80% AI focused in terms of what we're looking to do. But yeah, what you've described is exactly how I would love it to work. And what we talked about was, well, do you tag people? So you tell a story and you go and tag. And I was like, well, no one's going to do that. Like that's Facebook 10 years ago tagging photos. Like it needs to be a conversation, and then the AI just does it all for you. All the way down to ideally, and it doesn't do this at the moment. So the idea is during a conversation, if you want to record a story, you'll press record and record that story. But ideally, we'll get to the point pretty quickly where it will automatically give you a whole bunch of stories that come out of that conversation. And we're using Riverside for this. Riverside does that really well. It'll chop up our conversation here into a number of different nuggets that it thinks may or may not be ones that we want to run with. And we want Storypedia to essentially work the same way, where it's like, hey, you just had a conversation. There were 7 stories that seem to make sense. And to your point, ideally, from the transcript, let's go off now and ping these different people who were mentioned in that story. And 1, just let them know they're part of the story. But 2, let's see if they want to chime into it and start adding to it. And this is the thing with AI, though, is it just opens the door to so many different experiences.
No, I agree. One of the things I'll say to you is that it's actually relatively simple. There's a couple really useful tools out there that can take recorded audio and make a pretty accurate transcript from the audio, and not necessarily just Riverside. What I'm getting to is, and we're using Riverside right now. I have nothing against that, but in a pipeline for your application, it may be more valuable to have the AI run the transcript itself, which is a thing that can be done with a bunch of different tools. I'm not trying to teach you how to write the software. I'm just trying to thought process with you.
Yeah, plant some seeds. Oh, I love it.
Right. And so inside of the processing pipeline, you can actually get the transcript. And once you get something into language, that's why these things are called large language models, right? Then you can have some tooling take place and then say, oh, you mentioned Becky. Let me look at this user's profile. Oh, I see in the tree from grandpa down, Rebecca's one of his children, probably who he's talking about, and then do the next logical thing, which is prompt, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's not specific, something you have to do, but it's a thought process that you can maybe pass to your dev team about how things could get there.
It is what you're describing is where we do want to get to. And I think what's interesting is that, to your point, it's getting easier and easier and easier to start bringing these experiences to life, and just cheaper and cheaper as well, right? And what you've described there as well leads nicely into the evolution of what we want to do. So the question is, you've got all this wonderful content, all of these stories. It's kind of like a family first social network in the way that you're connecting, recording, you're seeing each other's stories and things like that. But then the so what? Like, what do you do with all of this content? Where does it then end up? So what we're now exploring is what we call Forever You. And the idea being that you can create your own digital avatar, but we talk about it being an authentic digital avatar. So, I mean, already it's fairly easy to spin up a version of me just based on a photo or a minute of video, and it's got my voice, it's got my, certainly it's got my face and some of my mannerisms. But unless it's got all of my thoughts and my philosophy on life and my life stories, it's not going to be an authentic representation of me. So what we're saying is, great, we're going to have all of this wonderful, authentic content, which essentially is data. And so if you want to, then you can create this version of you that will literally be the version of you that goes on to have a conversation much like we're having now, but with your future family. So they would sit there and just be chatting with me and asking me questions and having a conversation in the way that we're doing, all because we've managed to get all of this authentic content and so forth. So So that's something I'm particularly excited about. And we've already mocked up a version of that. So we're using 11 Labs as a demo,
Right.
the conversational interface. We've loaded up with a whole bunch of transcripts from stories that my mum shared. And I mean, I tell you what, it's really, really interesting though, because I've played it or shared it with a few people who never met my mum. And I've shared it with friends and family who obviously did know my mum. But more often than not, people end up in tears. Like it's a very emotional experience. And everyone agrees, including me, that it's a little kind of creepy because it's not my mum and you're chatting away with a digital representation. But my
Yeah.
thoughts are that it's going to go the way that online dating went sort of 25 years ago. Like, it was a little creepy. And it was a little weird. And
Yeah.
your friends would be like, you'd say, where'd you meet? And they're like, oh, we met at a bar. And then you find out later that they actually met online. And whereas now it's like, the assumption is that people have met online. I think it's going to go that same way with these avatars that represent who we are.
Yeah. A couple comments I'd make there. The first one is I think generationally today, people would probably prefer a digital representation and not a realistic life because there's this emotional tie. And I think it's easier to say, oh, that looks like dad, but it's not a crystal clear, right? It's a likeness. And the idea is it's giving you the sense, etc. I don't know. That changes the further away you get from the emotional tie, probably the easier it is for future folks to accept. This is what this person actually looked like, but we gave the digital representation a little bit more, not cartoony, but made it obvious because the folks who do have that emotional tie will probably respond negatively. But when you get a generation or two,
really good point.
Right, a generation or two away, it's fine. The other thing is I'm curious whether your comment about it becomes more accepted and you need some sort of we'll say a societal change, but not necessarily completely societal, but maybe it should always be digital. In other words, maybe the structure is, hey, we're representing this content and we're, here's a placeholder. But this person was a person. And so we want them to be, themselves. But if you think through that, brainstorming as we talk, if you have archival footage of someone in real video, you don't modify that video in any way. You play the home movies, if you will. So like, there's no reason.
No, you've actually hit on something which is a big part of the way that we want to approach this. So the idea being, I actually think the value of that clunky bit of video where your granddad's holding the phone upside down and talking into the wrong end of the phone and recording it, seeing these real human interactions, and like you said, that perhaps the grainy video of people chatting away, I actually think there's going to be a lot of value in the authentic original video that was recorded, as opposed to the polished, the filtered, and eventually the AI generated version. So I actually think the AI conversation that we would be having along the lines of what we are having now, where it feels very fluid and conversational, I think the ability then to get to the underlying content that drives that, I think there will be a lot of value in that. And I think that's what you're saying as well, right?
Yeah, one of the things I was getting to it as I was working it through in my head is maybe the end user should get the choice in the end.
Yeah.
Maybe the end user should see, you know what, make this a character interface, make this realistic. And it just depends on how close were you with this person who may not be here anymore. And that might be where your emotion comes from. And you may want this to be a caricature, not like I don't mean like Bugs Bunny. I just mean a simulacrum that isn't realistic and live, right? Because that will maybe makes you feel the wrong way. The other thing I wanted to say, no, go ahead.
I think you're right. Give the choice to the user, right? And because and look, and another example, the version that we have, this kind of mock-up that I'm using to explore the concept with investors, with my mum, it sounds 80% probably like her.
Yeah.
And I actually prefer that. We sort of call it the posh version of my mum because it sounds a little posh. It's her, but it's slightly not. And I think what's nice about that, and this is an audio only experience,
right.
So we're not bringing in video because the video experience is still, I think, quite a long way off. But the audio, yeah, it's near, but it's not quite there. And it's nice because you're chatting away and you know that it's not exactly her. It's not trying to be exactly her. But I tell you what, it's amazing how good this has become
Yeah.
because I've got an example, and I, I still need to figure out why this is, but I seeded it with an example where I said, look, the problem is anyone can create a digital version of you. They can have it say whatever they want it to say. So we're going to offer a way that you can essentially digitally sign your avatar
Right.
through our platform and say, yeah, actually, I am comfortable with this representing me long after I'm gone. And while I'm still alive as well, we're not trying to create YouTube for dead people. That's
Yeah.
actually one of
Yeah.
the things that I'm really, really keen on making sure it doesn't sort of go down that path. But the idea that you can digitally sign it and say this actually does represent me going forward. And sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit there. So yeah, it'll come back to me anyway. But I feel like I was going to make a big point and sort of lost my train a little bit.
No, you're fine. One thing I wanted to say too is if you haven't already looked at it, maybe make a note for the future or anybody else that's thinking about it. There is a really amazing company with some pretty powerful technology called HeyGen, Heygen, and
Yep.
they're making really decent quality lifelike avatar. Of the tools out there that I've seen in the last 12 months or so, they're as close to what I'll call pretty darn good. There's some open source tooling that can make an avatar, but it's glitchy. It's like if you're old enough and you know what max headroom is, it looks like max headroom from the 80s. If you don't know what the heck that is, maybe you find it on YouTube.
That is a great analogy. Yeah, the max headroom sort of jumping around. But so yeah, we did run a mock-up with HeyGen, and we did again sort of use this example of my mum. So my mum passed away a couple of years ago. She'd had Alzheimer's for about 6 years. What is really nice is that I had been recording both of my parents for many, many, many years. So I've got so much video content of both of them long before Alzheimer's turned up. And then in the early stages, I was still doing some recordings. So we've really got so much footage of my mum. And we did try some of that video. The problem is latency just becomes a bit more of an issue when you're bringing the video in.
Yeah.
And it's the weird kind of head bobble between, in the middle of a conversation. That bit just like, we talked a bit about the creepiness of it. That just feels it's still a bit too creepy. And I think even when it gets good, I think it'll be a while before we bring the video experience in, because I think
Yeah.
it will take people just a while to kind of catch up with the idea of having video.
One of my favorite phrases to help you out here, and I'm going to probably end up saying this on a lot of podcasts, but today is the worst day AI will ever be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the idea, if you think about this from an industry perspective, and before we got to the transformer architecture in about 2017, the way things were going from an ML perspective, transformers really made a significant difference. But we've had, like Dragon, naturally speaking, we've had the ability to dictate to a computer and get words to come out from a translation perspective for years. In fact, some of these dictation programs are going back into the late 80s. And horsepower has helped them a lot. And, if it was like 2005, 2010, and you needed the ability to put on a headset and dictate to Microsoft Word, you could make that happen pretty reliably. Some words wouldn't be perfect, but you could get by.
Yeah.
But at this point now, we're at the point where like YouTube can do streaming translation in caption form. You don't have to go set up all the words. It can do it almost, near real time is what I would say. And into whatever language you want, because that's no longer necessarily a problem.
And that's today, right?
And that's
Like,
today,
that's
right?
now.
And that's what I'm getting at, right? So the video that you're talking about and the glitches right now, yes, they're there, but we know darn well that they'll be changed pretty fast, and those improvements will be made to the point where it will be, wow, I can't quite tell.
Yeah.
And I don't think it'll take a long time. The trick will be, is there enough need or necessity in the market for people to go solve the problem?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. No, exactly.
And right now, everybody's focusing on that language. I wanted to go back for a second. I just wanted to make a comment because I think it's valuable, not just for you, but for the audience. I don't think most people put together the components, but the reason why large language models are going to make such a significant impact to us and why AI is going to be our future is in the same way, depending on what your experience with school, if you didn't learn good reading skills, you really couldn't excel at most other subjects. And it's hard for a child to grasp that. It's easy for an adult to understand why. But the idea that in order to learn all the other things, you have to learn how to read and comprehend. And once you do that, then all these other capabilities, you want to be a paleontologist, great. You want to be an archaeologist digging in the desert for bones, great. But to learn all that, you have to be able to read, right? If you take that skill set as a foundational kind of guy, language is that foundational skill set. Once you have an AI that can do language, it can follow instructions that it's given. And that's part of where we see, like, as things move into the agentic form, which is where I think you're going to end up moving your development functionality. The agents can say, okay, I want to use this tool. This tool can help me do a thing. I can read the instructions on that tool. I, in this case, being the AI. I can read the instructions on that tool and execute those instructions. And now this looks like a big leap, but if you understand the base of the tool being language processing, now all of a sudden your AI can do something it wasn't trained to do. And it looks like it's learning, which could scare some folks, but it's really just reading instructions, just like you do. And it learns this as a new skill. Now, today, at the moment, the models don't remember that. So they flush it after so the next time you ask, it goes back to the tool, it reads the instructions, it does it again, and it may not do it the same way because that's the non-deterministic part. But the concept is, if you can break the thing you're trying to add to the LLM or AI into instructions that are language-based, and your AI model knows how to use tools, which means it knows how to take on new instructions and process them, then you can teach it. And as we move forward in time, what will happen is the LLMs and AI infrastructure will gain memory. And so it'll learn how to use the tool, then it'll remember how to use that tool and remember how it used it last time. And you'll be able to add functionality. And this is all what's coming with agentic capabilities and model context protocol, or MCP servers. I bring that up because I think that's a direction you're probably going to want your system to take going forward.
Yeah, and you're right. Getting back to what you said at the start there, the idea that this is the worst right now that this is ever going to be.
Yeah.
And it's, it's interesting because for so long, my benchmark for AI, conversational AI, was Siri. And so I'd chat with Siri and say, "Hey Siri, can you call my dad?" And more often than not, it would get it wrong. Like, it was incredible how bad Siri was. And as I said earlier, all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, OpenAI turns up with ChatGPT, and suddenly this thing's able to understand what I'm saying. Not just that, but then come back with really what felt like any sort of response that I was looking to dig into, whether it was whatever, music related or something relating to the work that I do. All of a sudden that was there. And yet, interestingly, Siri's still kind of doing what Siri does. And obviously now, quite often, depending on what you ask, it'll tap into ChatGPT and go off and get the answer that way. But yeah, like, I'm curious. So when you extrapolate where we are and where it's going, how do you feel about it all? I mean, like, are you completely upbeat about this new technology that's landing in the laps of humans, or are you cautiously optimistic? Sort of where's your head at?
So I don't believe the doomsday scenario is realistic. I think Hollywood has polluted minds in a lot of cases. Hollywood does not exist to sell truth. Hollywood exists to sell tickets. And what sells tickets? Either a utopian or a dystopian movie, but not, hey, you know what? Life's kind of what it is. That's not a thing that people want to pay money for. And so there's a lot of influence around, oh, the AI is going to destroy everything and everyone in the world will lose their job and not be able to feed themselves. Yeah, I don't think that's what's happening. I do think that at the same time, there's a bunch of hype in the overall world around AI. And that is because if you just look at some historical data around technology adoption, there's a curve, and that curve follows a cycle, and this cycle's been around for decades. It's not new in any way, and it doesn't matter what the innovation is. That technology adoption, part of that circle is a peak of really insane expectations, and then what's known as the trough of disillusionment, where hey, none of the things that I was told come out the right way, like things are broken. And if you go back, just look at the innovation of the internet and how everything was going to change and go online. And we're looking at the early late 90s and the 2000 era, and everyone was getting funding, and there were 5 different pet websites and all that stuff, and then the .com crash. Why? Because expectations got reset. But since that moment in time, that trough, there's just been this constant elevated scale where most of us can't fathom how we would function without the internet today. And the idea that e-commerce is just commerce and that you buy things online because that's where you buy them, and going to a store is actually weird for a lot of folks. Not everybody.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is the innovation itself is not necessarily the whole inflection point. I've used this analogy before, but I'll give it to you again because I think it's relevant. When the iPhone first came out, it was not the first phone. It was not even the first smartphone. And it wasn't the first phone that you could have apps on, although it was the easiest phone you could get apps on. And it wasn't that the cell phone was the invention, because that happened in the 80s by Motorola. It was the idea that certain technologies and innovations got bundled together, and then the application space from the App Store pushed on top of that phone. But in 2007, an iPhone didn't even have the ability to do copy and paste. But nobody remembers that because it's not relevant anymore, and it's been a long time, right? So the innovation underneath the hood was cell phone technology. But what made the iPhone unique was building on top of the innovation and providing a product capability that didn't exist before. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that your functionality is really not, hey, we're AI related. It's more, we have this cool capability that we're building on top of AI as a foundation, but we're innovating a completely different thing, and we're providing a service, product, whatever you want to call it, that isn't easily done otherwise. And to me, that's where all the success is going to come from in the future. And that's the thing that we're not even seeing yet, which is the innovation is the large language model and the AI. And that's cool. And we've got this big bubble right now of, oh, everything's LLM. But what I want to see is in 5 years, the really amazing applications that have been built on top of that foundation that are super innovative and that solve a lot of problems that we have today, and that don't take away jobs, but make new ones and all those things. And that's what I think is going to happen. I don't think it's going to go down the negative route.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree. I think, but it does fascinate me the speed with which things continue to improve. And to your point earlier, it's like, it's talking about the video avatars, and yeah, they're a bit glitchy. And like you said, they've gone from being the max headroom to being pretty good, and pretty soon they'll be perfect. It's the speed with which that happens. Because again, my experience of AI, conversational AI, being Siri's been average for like 5, 6, 7 years. It just, it didn't. There were incremental, very small improvements, and I was like, oh right, okay, well here's Apple, at the time the most valuable company in the world, with a lot of very talented engineers. They know how to make good products. And this is the speed with which they seem to be advancing AI, at least within the realm that I was able to see. And I was like, so that's the speed at which it's going to move. And it's, for another 10 years, it's going to get a bit better. And maybe in 20 years, we'll be chatting with something. And then all of a sudden, there's ChatGPT. And then every time there's something, I'm like, geez, I wish it did this. A couple of months later, there it is. It does it. And, it does a bunch of other things as well.
Yeah, the rate of pace of change is exponential. And it's hard for people to grasp, but it is pretty outrageous. All right, cool. I think we covered a lot of ground. It was a really good conversation. Any final thoughts or comments you have?
Well, look, I mean, I say this to everyone. I'm officially a broken record, but interview your parents. Like if you've got parents, if you've got grandparents, interview your parents. I mean, obviously use the Winnie app because it's one of the main use cases that we built it for. But if you're not using Winnie, and unfortunately, if you're on Android at the moment, you can't. So, but just record them. Just capture that video, because once you've got that video, I'm yet to meet anybody who said, geez, I wish I'd never actually sat down and had a conversation with my parents and recorded some of it. So, so that's the main thing I leave everyone with. It's super easy in this day and age. You can do what we've done. You can hop on a video call if they're not with you. Again, you can use Winnie for that. We've actually built it that way. But just do it. Just take the time to interview your parents.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jeremy. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Jeff.